that we sent out that we would change the speaker for tonight. We're really very pleased that Alex Furneaux stepped in at the last minute. Frankie McLean, who we were expecting, his partner has just had a baby girl. His partner's called Amy, and the baby girl's called Cleo Mary. So that's really great news, but that's the reason that Frankie couldn't be here, which was a bit unexpectedly early. So thank you, Alex. Alex is currently working at Deaf Action as a youth project coordinator, and he previously came to Deaf Action as a social worker from on training at Robert Gordon University, and he did his placement at Deaf Action. So we're really grateful to Alex for stepping in at the last moment, and thanks again. We're looking forward to hearing you talk, which is about children, social and emotional issues, development of deaf children.
Yeah. So thanks very much for coming along. It's slightly short notice, but I'm sure it'll be interesting. I hope so. So, as Rachel said, I'm going to be talking today about the development of deaf children. This is a presentation that I did last year as part of the social work placement, which is why I think Frankie has nominated me. So, thank you very much, Frankie. But just to give you a bit more of a background about my kind of past and what kind of brought me here, it's actually quite nice to be back here at Murray House. I did 2 years of primary teaching after I left high school, and the first lecture I was at was actually in this room. So it's quite nice to be on the other side. So after that, it wasn't quite for me. I did a few bits of youth work down in Edinburgh before kind of realising social work. Went up to Aberdeen to study social work up at RGU, and did some youth work up there as well. So it's definitely been my kind of interest the whole way through. Failed a placement, but got a repeat one down in Deaf Action, and haven't moved back since. They had a position as a youth worker and a project going on there, and I was lucky enough to get that position. So exciting time, yeah, it's been a really kind of interesting area for me, and full circle, because working with children and young people has always been sad. So the development of deaf children, I chose to kind of explore this area, as I said, because it is kind of more where my background is, it's what I'm interested in, and it's what I love. So the basic outline of today is going to look at some of the different issues that I face for deaf children in terms of their development, how these challenges that they face can have an impact, and what can we do as professionals to help families and children with these kind of difficulties. And I've used a mixture of personal experience and evidence from research to kind of help support my points. If you have any questions throughout, just pop your hand up and ask. I'll try and field them as best as I can. So just a nice quote to start off. So deaf children are often delayed in language development, tend to show greater impulsivity and poorer emotional regulation, and they often have an impoverished vocabulary of emotional language. I feel like this is quite a nice quote to set the scene of what I'm kind of talking about today, and it starts to paint a picture of the difficulties that deaf children may encounter throughout their life. So what are some of the issues that deaf children may face? The first 2 years of linguistic development in children are vital. At those stages, children acquire language relatively easy. But if language is not accessible, such as the case of prelingual deafness, that critical period for language acquisition can often be missed. There's research that looked into how deaf children with an ineffective mode of communication are at risk of developing mental health, mental health problems in their adolescent years. Many deaf children have difficulties in forming relationships with their hearing peers, and additionally other researchers looked into how it shows it's difficult for deaf children to fully engage and join in with groups of their hearing peers, and the most effective outcomes have been on a one-to-one basis. Some of the other challenges they may face is understanding emotions, in self-regulation, understanding social rules and norms, issues around attachment, isolation and loneliness and exclusion and stuff that you may be familiar with. One of my favourite pieces of research that I looked at as part of my social work placement found quite interesting results. It looked at the modes of communication between hearing parents and deaf children. And what they explored was the levels of communication between the parent and child, and how it can have an impact on their development, their self-esteem, and their perceived quality of life. And what they found was where there was a mode of communication in any form, the child is more likely to experience higher levels of self-esteem and a higher perceived quality of life. On the flip side, where children experience less than ideal understanding between their parents, there are higher levels of depressive symptoms. These shared modes of communication that I talk about, it could be in any form. So it could be speech, it could be writing, it could be a formal BSL, a form of sign language such as BSL, or any other form of sign. Just as long as the parent or the child are able to understand and share their ideas, their thoughts, and their feelings, which I thought was quite an interesting factor. So the modes of communication, like where deaf children are feeling withdrawn and isolated due to a lack of communication between their family and peers, there can be massive emotional costs, such as social exclusion, low self-esteem, low moods, displays of challenging behaviour, and depression, mental health, and similar issues. The easier deaf people feel they are able to communicate with and understand others, the better development they will face and the better quality of life that they will experience. Communication at home is directly related to that child's early socio-emotional development and their language development, but also to the quality of life and the subsequent issues they may face in their adolescence and adulthood. So what are these potential challenges to development of young deaf people? Incidental learning I've put at the top, and the lack of incidental learning opportunities. Hearing children often gain information and knowledge in a passive manner through listening in, eavesdropping, observing to the world around them. Research typically says it's about 70 to 90% of what we learn is through this informal, passive, incidental learning. And it helps us to kind of understand our surroundings, the people and the world around us, cultures, rules, and the social norms that we live by. Deaf people don't have this ability. They don't have the ability to listen in. They can't just, see a conversation unless it's being delivered in sign language, which majority of conversations are not. Equally, conversations aren't, accessible, but they've got to be direct. It's not as easy for a deaf child to listen into a conversation that's happening behind them. You need to have their full attention. You need to be, looking at you when you're delivering information. So incidental learning is a massive issue, and then 70 to 90% of what we learn is through this. Where are they going to get these opportunities from? Parental styles is another aspect that could cause some challenges in that child's development. So how a parent manages that kind of initial identification of deafness can have a serious impact on development. So the identification at birth may be a point of crisis or stress for a parent, and cause them to adopt different parenting roles, such as if they were authoritarian, then there'd be lots of rules with no exceptions and trying to be quite controlling. Or it could be on the other side if they're uninvolved, essentially neglectful and not giving them that input that they need. What's important is you know, that early identification and intervention, and providing more support for parents. You know, the awareness and managing their anxieties and the feelings that they're going through, and providing them with the support that they need. But I'll go more into that later on. Essentially, they've got to be engaging with the professionals and use the guidance and support. And the more they do this, the better chances that child is going to have when they develop. Linguistic overprotection, a bit of a mouthful. But what I mean with that is that some parents might have the fear of kind of misunderstanding or miscommunication. And as such, they might reduce the linguistic complexity and the cognitive complexity of communication. And as such, that may limit that child's ability and the opportunities they have to develop further, to learn their social and emotional states and characteristics, as well as learning additional or more complex languages. Culture and identity is another issue that, you know, it's just as important as the rest. You know, with deaf children born into hearing families, they're essentially minorities in their own home. You know, they're essentially a minority culture in a family that is unable to teach them about the deaf culture, to teach them about the deaf identity and about the language. So that child is forced to live and grow up through two different cultures, the deaf and the hearing cultures. And there's research that can identify with, you know, people in the diversity of deaf identities and the impact it can have on self-esteem. You know, and what they found was that deaf people who grow up and embrace the values of both the deaf and hearing cultures actually develop a higher level of self-esteem into their adult years. The challenge with this is the confusion of where your identity fits into at the kind of early stages. I mean, if you're aware of Erickson and his theories, you know, the adolescent years, they're at a critical point in kind of finding who they are and what they want to do. And if they're kind of still trying to identify what culture and where they fit into that, you know, there can be kind of massive implications on kind of long term. Right, just to kind of break. Anyway, so many of the responses that individuals will display to these kind of challenges will involve some coping mechanisms. Coping mechanisms are an essential part of life that we all have and we all use. These are what we may use to adapt and manage any circumstances, regardless of the stressful nature that this may carry. We can all use positive and negative forms of coping mechanisms, and the same can be said about deaf people. So to take a short break, I'd like you to turn to your neighbour or whoever is around you and have a think and a discussion about coping mechanisms. What works for you? You know, how do you cope with a stressful situation? And once you've thought of that, I'd quite like you to think about how that might be used by a deaf child. You know, what kind of coping mechanisms might they use? You know, would it be the same as your own? You can give me any ideas, good or bad ones. I'm not judging anybody. So I'll give you a few minutes if you want to have a wee chat.
You're not tweeting with the whisk. see that picture today? It's a picture of a green woodpecker flying with the wings upon its back. Look on the BBC News homepage. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. You wouldn't tweet it in school. School.
Okay, there's enough time. You probably had enough time to, discuss the neighbours. Can I hear some of your ideas? How do you cope with stressful situations? Not everyone at once. Yeah.
My name is Jo. I would say my coping strategy is to hate. I don't make eye contact with people, I avoid people, I try and stay under the radar, and that's one thing. And then the flip side, I put on a smile, so it means that everything looks okay and nobody knows it's and that's it.
Yeah. Avoidance is a well-used one. We'll talk about it a little more. Whether it's healthy or not, it's entirely up to yourself. Anyone else?
Is that okay if I use my voice?
Yeah.
I use humour as a coping mechanism. More stressful, more silly I become, and I suppose what I try and do is lull people into a false sense of security. They just think I'm an idiot, and they leave me alone. That's what I use. I've used that as being a coder.
Yeah.
And having one foot, either the deaf world or the hearing world, and finding social norms confusing, not knowing which way to behave in which world as a child.
Yeah.
I think I know. I'm not too sure. But, yeah, I find myself just giggling and saying silly things and probably freaking people out a bit, and then realising my intentions were actually quite good. I was trying to say I'm okay, but it doesn't come across like that.
And I think that's a really good point, and it's one that you can actually relate in with what children might use. Same with avoidance, if there's a problem, just ignore it and I'll get sorted. But yeah, avoidance, humor, things that you might even see. I'm not saying you're a child, but these are typical coping mechanisms that you may actually see in chat tools. So thank you. Any other one to give their opinion?
I was talking about one where it's just sort of escapism in a way, where you go home and just watch a film or watch TV and just switch off your things. And I think children can do that with, I don't know, computer games, or we were talking about locking yourself away in your room when you're a child. And it's the same for any child, but
yeah, and that's what we see in this diagram here, 40th level wizards playing these computer games, this obsessive learner kind of getting engrossed in books, so many people kind of use escapism to avoid that reality and avoid the problems that they face.
You probably all recognise this, people maybe get angry. Deaf and hearing people do this and they'll get more shouting, or they'll be start throwing things, or slam doors, shake the doors, that kind of physical. I think I've seen one person who has actually hit their head off the wall. So it's how to get that frustration out, and for some people it's through angry outbursts. Not me.
Let me just look out for a better. But yeah, frustration, again, you'll see that time and time again. If we can't manage a problem, like, how does that kind of equate into how we're feeling, the emotions, and how we can display that? You mentioned it earlier, the potential displays of aggressive, challenging behavior. So, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone got any Okay, that's fine. I appreciate all the input though. I think it's a valuable kind of experience just to kind of think about, our coping mechanisms, because it's something we may do on a daily basis, something we may do without even thinking about it. So I think it is important to think about our coping mechanisms and, the coping mechanisms that children, and deaf children in particular, are going to use to manage these challenges that they face on a daily, regular basis. So, like, there's kind of different coping mechanisms, and there's positive and negative ones. Aggression and avoidance. Where can we kind of fit that in? Some of the kind of more positive ones that I'll kind of talk about today. So resilience. Time and time again, you're out there, a resilient child. They manage to get through whatever. The concept of emotional resilience has been described as the general capacity for flexible and resourceful adaptation to the external and internal stressors. So essentially, it's resilience is used to refer to the factors, processes, and mechanisms that, in the face of significant risk, trauma, adversity, stress, disadvantage, that appear to work to enable a family, an individual, or a community to survive, to thrive, and to be successful. For example, how they manage with the challenges they face, how well they can cope in these stressful situations. And resilience can emerge from a range of different sources and a range of different assets, such as our personality, our values, our attitudes, and the behaviours to the environmental factors around us, at home, at work, at school, or in the community. Positive reappraisal, again, I've put a lot of big words in here just to look at it. So positive reappraisal, generally it's the cognitive strategies for reframing a situation to appraise a difficult situation more positively and to see it in a more favourable light. Essentially, a crude example of this is seeing the glass half full. So what we may do in a stressful situation is consider the positive aspects and circumstances, which in turn will result in kind of feeling in a positive way. For example, I had failed about a year and a half, I failed a social work placement. Means I have to delay my graduation, which will be this year. But I got an extra practice experience. I got to come back to my home city. I got a placement in Deaf Action. I got to get involved with the deaf community, and I've successfully got a job out of it. So, you know, out of that negative situation that happened before comes a brand new positive kind of frame of mind that has changed the journey that I have gone down. And that is all through the use of kind of positive reappraisal. Social networks and kind of social capital, it's one of my favourite things, and I'm happy to talk about it in detail at another stage. So social support is one of the key methods that we use, you know, as we turn to family, friends, community groups, neighbours, and so on, in order to receive advice and support on both a physical and emotional level. There's a German study that looked at parents of deaf or hard of hearing children and looked at how they interacted with other parents of deaf children or deaf adults. And what they found was the parents and adults helped each other, and their shared experiences and shared understanding actually helped support their role as a parent and improved their communication and helped them build confidence in their roles in their daily lives. So social networks and social capital, you know, this understanding about kind of shared experiences and knowledge, I think it offers really relevant advice and support during stressful periods of our life. And social networks and the support that they can offer should never be discounted as a valuable kind of source and a valuable coping mechanism. So that's just a taster of some of the positive ones. Some of the negative ones, you know, and unhealthy coping mechanisms may include withdrawal, escape, avoidance, and being risk averse, amongst others. You know, these are all common maladaptive coping mechanisms where a person does not want to face the problems. They don't want to face these risks and challenges and anxieties that they may experience in a new situation. You know, we may want to remove ourselves from experiencing any further stress and anxiety. So we take ourselves out of the picture, you know, and that in turn can bring about isolation. We may become overprotective, so we have control over our actions and our behaviours and the future stress or crises that we may face. But again, you know, becoming adverse to any risks or opportunities that we may take again. The difficulty with the term negative unhealthy coping mechanisms is all about kind of, well, how does it become negative? How does it become unhealthy? You know, the consumption of alcohol to relax is seen as a socially acceptable form, or using escapism to watch movies, read books, play computer games to escape reality and enter a new world. But when these behaviors begin to take over someone's life, you know, avoiding responsibilities, escaping reality, it becomes to like, take control. It might have a direct impact on their own life. And it's the point that we may begin to consider them to be unhealthy. So when thinking about unhealthy coping mechanisms, we need to think about the wider picture. Is it a one-off occasion? You know, how is that behaviour having an impact on that person's life? You know, is it impacting? What kind of effect is it having? So it is, I think it is important to think about it in a broader sense rather than just so coping strategies, there was a piece of research that kind of looked at how children use their coping to reduce the emotional impact of stressful situations. What they found was a distinction between two different categories. The emotional focused category of coping mechanism, which is directed inwards at the emotions that are faced and feel through stressors. And the problem focus, which is again directed outwards, you know, looking at the stressor. And what they found was this method, this form was actually more effective in reducing the emotional negativity that can build up in younger people. For example, if a young person was kicked out of home, they're going to face high levels of anxiety and concerns over where they will go. So there's two kind of options. They might sit and dwell on this and focus on the feelings and how they might work that out. Or they might look at the wider picture and think, well, I could go out and look for a flat and look at how I can address this, look at the attempts to solve this problem, and therefore having an knock-on effect on the source of the emotions. Other research explored how deaf children use their social networks within the deaf community as a form of coping mechanism for support and to address the feelings of loneliness and isolation. And what they found was that deaf children experienced the most comfort from being around deaf peers and using their family members for emotional support. So this confirms that deaf children benefit more from problem-focused coping and also supported the text that suggested contact with deaf children may lessen the negativity of the mainstreaming of these relations. So this idea about social networks and social support as a means of coping, again, helps us to kind of value the power that other people can have in terms of kind of managing these challenges that we face and addressing these issues. This concept about a shared identity and the shared experiences can in fact enhance a person's ability to manage any difficult periods or emotions that a deaf person, a child may face in their life, such as isolation. So what does all this information mean for us as professionals, for people working with the deaf community? And what does this mean to our practice? Well, where there is a universal screening process for hearing loss in newborns and early identification and intervention are put into place, then obviously there's been significant benefits to that child. These improvements are seen in the development of language, literacy and communication, and more successful outcomes in academic and socio-emotional development. Research explored that children enrolled into intervention before the age of 11 months old had stronger vocabulary and verbal reasoning skills at the age of 5 than the children who were later enrolled. In a similar study, 2 groups of children were observed and assessed in their social-emotional development and their educational attainment. The 2 groups were from those that were identified late and those who were identified early, before 6 months. And the differences between the 2 groups that were found became larger and larger over time, with the identified group showing an advantage over those children who were late. And it's particularly noteworthy but that by the time of 5 years old, those that were identified before the age of 6 months old were achieving within the normal range of other hearing children, which is particularly interesting and just kind of highlights that importance of getting in there at the earliest possible stage. Early identification and intervention is not just the responsibility of the family or the professionals, it should be a joint approach and a joint partnership, which incorporates the family-centered approach and involves a variety of people and professionals throughout that child's development. Another research shows that the most success in early identification and intervention models are those that actively involve the families. Parents obviously have a key role in partnership with professionals in terms of providing information about their child's development and learning and how the family and cultural context have an influence on their child. For example, religious beliefs that may influence the development, may influence the education of that child. The parents are the experts and they're going to be able to give professionals that information to make sure they get that appropriate support. And as I said, the best outcomes are achieved when families are involved and intervention is initiated at the earliest possible stage. The early provision of intervention services may provide families with the support they need to become actively involved in promoting that child's linguistic development. The more involved a parent is in communicating with their child and providing support with their education, the more able a deaf child would be in terms of their language and communication development. So without any additional support or experience of hearing loss, families encounter a number of challenges in the upbringing of their children. Supports mainly come from the family at home, but they can also come from extended family, education professionals, speech and language therapy, and so on. And the more that parents engage and interact, the more likely that child is going to be to acquire language and to improve their socio-emotional development. Proactive families have been seen who are involved with the deaf children and the child development, more willing to accept support and are more willing to meet the challenges they may face, then that child is more likely to succeed and to achieve with their communication, their understanding, their skills and knowledge acquisition, and the attainment in education and employment in their life. Another piece of research, I keep saying the same thing, you'll get tired eventually. They explored parents as equal partners. And what they kind of looked at is how families and professionals must work together quite closely to provide the most appropriate and ideal circumstances for development. And, parents of deaf children who've never encountered this before, they may face that high period of stress and crisis at that stage, and unsure where to turn and where to get the information from. But where the parent has a wide range of resources available, from professionals, physical, social and emotional supports, the stress levels can be significantly reduced, and therefore having an improvement on the child's development and their learning. School-based parental involvement, such as parents' meetings, involvement with educational plan meetings, and all these things, actually predicted early reading skills in younger children as well. Maternal communicative skills are often seen as a predictor of language and literacy, where maternal communicative skill is a strong aspect of parental involvement, given that the parent must be highly involved to develop mutual communication with a deaf or a hard of hearing child. Another piece of research that highlighted quite an interesting point is that deaf children develop sign language in the same way that hearing children will develop spoken language. The difficulty with this is that 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, which means that parents are going to have a limited amount of knowledge and information and awareness about deafness, about sign language, and about the most appropriate ways to communicate with a child. With that lack of shared communication and shared mode of communication, as I was discussing earlier, it can have a negative impact on the development, the self-esteem, and perceived quality of life. So with that 9%, that kind of highlights that parents are not the experts. They're going to have to look to the professionals and look to the people involved with the deaf community who've got that experience to provide them with information, with guidance and support. And I hope you'll all agree that it is crucial for all children to receive an appropriate and healthy development, and communication is a key factor in this. Again, there's a journal that explored how parents choose to communicate with a deaf child. And what they found was that they were mainly influenced by information provided to them at the early stages of identification and intervention. These sources could be from educational professionals, health and social care, audiology, and the list can go on. And it's important for these professional bodies to have up-to-date and accurate information regarding parenting and the support that is available, to ensure that, you know, all deaf children will have a successful and healthy development. So it is important to provide clear and accurate information that's adequate for their needs, as a means of support to give them the best opportunities. And parents have got to be able to access and understand that relative information in terms of their child, the development, the available supports, and so on, to enable them to make the right choices which suits their styles and their way of life. So, in Scotland, as you'll kind of all be aware of the different policies that are going about, in Scotland we've got GERFEC, Getting It Right for Every Child. And that looks at all children in Scotland and making sure their needs are being met according to the Shinari principles, which is safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, responsible, respected, and included. All of these indicators are important, and it's good that the Scottish Government recognises that. But if there's problems with communication, each one of these can fall through, you know, and there's going to be problems if there is no form of communication or issues with communication. All of these factors, you know, won't be achieved or will struggle to be achieved. You know, ensuring a child is included in their social groups. If they're the only deaf child in a hearing group, then they're going to be to make sure they're respected, where a child is being heard and involved in decisions. Again, if there's issues with communication. To be responsible, to be provided with opportunities to engage with their schools and their community. Again, the same issue. And to achieve, you know, the ability to learn and development and to, you know, develop their skills and their knowledge at home and community and in school. And I could go on forever. So it all comes down to the professionals, to help families to support their children to reach these goals and fulfill their potential. GERFEC and the mental health strategy, they both highlight the importance of having good mental health and the need to improve services and the need to work together to achieve this. If a deaf child experiences delays in language acquisition and educational attainment, then there's the risk of social isolation increasing, and then the chances of poor mental health, such as anxiety and depression, you know, they may face later on. So the mental health strategy highlights that the early years are a critical period in shaping life in terms of learning, communication, and language. And that can have an impact on their mental health. And the strategy highlights that, you know, this opens up an opportunity for us to break the cycles of poor development and poor mental health into a child's adolescence and adult life. The parenting strategy, a lesser known one, it's new to me at the end of last year, but, and that looked at ensuring that all parents are provided with adequate and appropriate information and resources to ensure that professionals work together in partnership and to make sure that the best opportunities for parents to raise their children are there and to reduce any additional pressure or stressors that they may face. What the strategy aims to do is get away from the stigma of parents asking for help. You know, that shouldn't be seen as, you know, they're unable to carry out their role. And then it's pushing more towards the viewpoint that everyone is entitled to support and given the same chances and skills to be a successful parent. The See Here strategy, as again most of you will be aware of, it's a relatively new policy regarding sensory impairment, and it does make reference to children and young people, and explains that children and young people should expect appropriate and timely intervention in the early years for as long as required. And it should be achieved in a person-centered approach with all parties and agencies working in a joint process. So it brings a lot of the ideas that I've kind of raised into policy, into something that's being delivered. And the approach seeks to provide early intervention and identification of sensory impairment while providing support for children and families. So although there's a lot going on in terms of theory and research and policy which looks at deafness in childhood, the issues and the impact it can have on development, and what can be done to address this, these problems still remain. Many of these policies, I think they're relatively new, so it might take time for them to kind of filter through and come into practice. Perfect is a working model, so we're still seeing changes in how that's delivered. So, as I said, it might take time to actually see any real change in the way that we work with families and children affected by deafness. I think it's clear for us, in order to provide the best opportunities in life for deaf children, we must be aware of the different issues that they might face and ensure that we work alongside other professionals, and especially with the family, giving them the same chances and the same opportunities to develop, to learn and engage with society, just as every other child does. So I've got a couple of videos that I'd like to show you. Many of you may have seen them before, but I think they're quite relevant to what I've been talking about and presenting today. And kind of shows in real life the challenges that young deaf people will face. So with the video, we'll meet a 15-year-old Ugandan boy called Patrick, who is deaf and does not have any sign language. So if you give me 1 second. So there's 2 videos. You may have seen the first one. I only found the second one after, and the second one is 10 weeks later. So are we okay with the live stream? Yeah.
15 years old. He was born deaf, but in this remote region of northern Uganda, there are no schools for deaf children. In his whole life, Patrick's never had a conversation. Hello. Good? His father, Charles, looks after him. They are only able to communicate through very basic gestures. We've been sitting here talking about Patrick in front of him, and while he's been watching us, he doesn't understand what we're saying. It feels almost rude. But this is what Patrick's life is like all the time. I'm here with someone who wants to change all that. Raymond Okello is deaf himself and a sign language teacher. Do you think he could learn sign language? This is pretty much Patrick's existence. His father gestures to him what he wants him to do, and when he's finished, he goes back to his hut to spend the rest of the day on his own. Patrick's fate is not unusual. The majority of deaf people in sub-Saharan Africa have never been taught sign language. Unable to communicate with others, they are trapped in their own minds. Raymond became deaf as a child after a bout of malaria. 6 6 months ago, he traveled to the capital for intensive training in sign language. Now he's returned to his village to do something unprecedented. He is going to teach the first sign language course ever set up here.
Raymond, are you nervous?
It's 2 o'clock. The first deaf students start turning up. And class begins.
The course has already started, but Patrick hasn't turned up yet, and I'm worried that his father couldn't convince him to leave home.
A few minutes later, Patrick arrives.
Patrick's transformation is amazing. It's almost impossible to believe it's the same boy we met yesterday.
New deaf students keep arriving. Many have walked miles to be here. There's a 9-year-old boy and an 80-year-old woman. Before the end of the class, each new student goes to the front. The class votes on a new name for them. This is now Patrick's sign name, and he will use it for the rest of his life. He has just been baptized into a whole new world.
So I'll show you the video as well. The start of it kind of repeats on what was already kind of said there, but you know, it's a sense of kind of 10 weeks later, Patrick is getting on.
He was born deaf, but in this remote northern region in Uganda, there are no schools for deaf children. In his whole life, Patrick's never had a conversation. His father Charles looks after him. They are only able to communicate through very basic gestures. Patrick's fate is not unusual. Most deaf people in sub-Saharan Africa have never been taught sign language. Unable to communicate with others, they are trapped in their own minds. Raymond became deaf as a child after a bout of malaria. 6 months ago, he travelled to the capital for intensive training in sign language. Now he's returned to his village to do something unprecedented. He's going to teach the first sign language course ever set up here. The class begins, and Patrick joins. class is the first of many to come. So far, it's been a success. Before the end, each new student goes to the front. The class votes on a new name for them. This is now Patrick's sign name, and it marks the beginning of a new life. Ten weeks later, we return to check on class. For the first time, these students are able to communicate. And it's changing their lives. Now Patrick and his classmates are able to make plans.
I'm guessing it was Christmas last year. But, you know, I think you'll all agree it's a really touching story. And it just kind of shows how kind of powerful communication is, and how much of an impact communication plays. Without communication, we face isolation, daily struggles. But with a form of communication, we can kind of pave the way for a new lease of life, which is clearly evidenced by the happiness, the boost of self-esteem, the aspirations for the future, and the new social networks that Patrick has developed. So that's the end, I'm afraid. I don't have any more. I'm sorry, I've been looking down a lot of the time. I was asked to do it yesterday morning if I had more time to prepare. I may have even signed. But I welcome any questions they may have. You know, I hope you find it as interesting as I found it, kind of looking into this. But I welcome any questions.